Yeah.
Greetings, my dear friends. This time I have with me Admiral Monty Khanna. And Admiral Monty Khanna is not a stranger to people. Well, before we get into any of this, let me very frankly say it's a pleasure, it's a privilege to host Monty with us. And we are going to be on both channels, the Double M Dialogues as well as ChaxSimplifies. Admiral Khanna is a very old friend, a course mate, a dear friend, and we've been together in the submarine arm also. But why am I introducing Monty to you? Monty, why don't you introduce yourself?
Okay, Chax, firstly, delighted to be here and glad that you'll be doing this jointly. And I follow even Chax Simplifies quite closely. And I think you're doing some really great work. So first, let me say, Chakrapani, Commander Chakrapani is a dear friend and course mate, and also a fellow submariner. So we've spent a lot of time in the Soviet Union together, and really glad to be here. And for me, I retired maybe around 4.5 years back. After that, I was with the NSCS, the National Security Council Secretariat, as the Assistant Military Advisor for 4 years. And recently, I have been inducted as a member of the National Security Advisory Board. So that's me in short. Our mission in Double M Dialogues, at least, is to create a sense of maritime awareness in the country. And for all our viewers, I'm thankful for netting in so that you help us in this cause. So, Chax, over to you.
Thanks, Monty. And I would suggest all viewers of ChaxSimplifies to also kindly subscribe, like, and share this video on Double M Dialogues so that we can promote Double M Dialogues as much as I would request the likewise. Very frankly, for viewers of Double M Dialogues, I'm Commander Chakrapani or Chax, and about 25 years in the Indian Navy, followed by about 14 years in corporate in Tech Mahindra, handling marketing and strategic initiatives. And here I am as a part of ChaxSimplifies. Objective here is something similar, except I want to make the cracking of the SSB easy for youngsters. I want to spread the idea of geopolitics with people who don't really feel geopolitics is a nice subject or they feel it is very complicated. So I try and break it down into easily understandable bites. Here now we are with Taiwan. Now, Taiwan is something which has been in the news for the last few years, and increasingly so. Just at the sunset of 2025, China came up with a huge exercise virtually surrounding Taiwan and trying to exercise blockade of Taiwan. Let's try and understand what Taiwan is. Taiwan is an island. It's an island which is not small by any stretch of imagination. It is 350 kilometers in length, 100 to 140 kilometers in width. It is separated from mainland of China by the Taiwan Straits, which are as narrow, if you want to call it narrow, as 120 kilometers or 180 kilometers at the widest as far as mainland China is concerned. The island of Taiwan itself is very rocky. Almost 70% is rocky and mountainous. In fact, there are snow-capped peaks in Taiwan, in the island of Taiwan. The eastern part of the island is, there are hardly any beaches there. It is pure rock and vertical rock. It's the western side which is more habitable, and almost 2.3 million people is the population of Taiwan. So it's not a small country by any stretch. But what is even more important is the fact that it has a standing army of a little over 100,000 or 1 lakh. It has 2 submarines, 22 frigates, and 4 destroyers. It has got a lot of other craft, but even more interesting is it has 350 fighter jets. Many of them are the F-16s and slightly older than that, most of them from the United States. So Taiwan is not a small country, it's not a walkover country, and it is an important linchpin as far as keeping China under control is concerned, because it is the pivot for the first island chain. If you take a look at the maps, you'll realize that outside of China, on the east coast where it has access to the Pacific, it is these set of islands running from South Korea, Japan, Taiwan into Philippines and down south and all the way up to Malacca, in a way box China off. As we get along with this, you will realize that there is a history to this whole thing. Monty, I want to start with the history and shed a bit of light on the first and the second island chains. Why are they so important for China?
Yeah, so thanks, Chax. And coming to the history of Taiwan, so Taiwan actually, Taiwan was a part of China in the old days, and during the Second World War, and in fact, even before the Second World War, it was Chiang Kai-shek who headed the Kuomintang, who was the ruler of China, so to speak. But in the 20s, in the 20s, the communist movement started in China when Mao sort of started the communist movement along with his mentors, and that gained steam, and that resulted in a civil war. Now, that civil war brewed for many years with the communists fighting the KMT. And then, really, what happened came along the Second World. And once the Second World War started, then both these forces aligned together to combat the Japanese. But the moment the Japanese were defeated in 1945, then once again the KMT and the communists were resumed their civil war, which continued for another 4 years, right till 1949. In which year Chiang Kai-shek was finally defeated on the mainland and he fled to Taiwan. And thereafter, he claimed that both parties claimed that they were the actual China. So Taiwan claimed that they were the legitimate rulers of China, and so did the communists. In those early years, I would say Taiwan was quite powerful relative to China because China was weak, and they went through what was first the Great Famine, then the Cultural Revolution, all of Mao's policies, which, failed in many ways. But gradually, in the tongue chopping era, China started becoming more and more powerful. And at one stage, generally people came to realize that, that China was formally inducted into the Security Council way before all this. And most countries in the world have come to accept the One China policy, in which I would say mainland China is regarded as the larger of the two and the main ruler of Greater China. That being said, Taiwan still exists as a political entity, I would say. They run their own government. They're independent in every way. But formal diplomatic recognition, most countries don't do that. And as a result, most countries don't have an embassy there, but they have a trading office because China is a huge trading partner. Just one or two things, Chax, I would like to say that when you compare geography, it's very useful to give a comparative Indian state, and that I would say is Kerala. Because, China is roughly 35,800 square kilometers, and Kerala is around 37 or 38,000 square kilometers. So if you can roughly see, size-wise, I would say Taiwan is equivalent to the state of Kerala. So not too
Right.
large, not too small. The dimensions have been given by Chakrapani. One issue that you may need to keep in mind is the demographics of Taiwan. Because Taiwan today has got a population of roughly around between 23 and 24 million people. But the important factor is that the fertility rate in Taiwan is 0.8, which is amongst the lowest in the world. So it's a declining population, and that plays into security when we discuss security in greater detail. So over to you, Chax, and you can continue more on maybe on the armed forces of Taiwan.
Monty, as far as the armed forces are concerned, what is important is not the size of the armed forces of Taiwan, but what is the force that China can bring to bear on Taiwan. Let's look at it in a slightly different fashion. If you take a look at China and its huge armed forces, the PLA Air Force, the PLA Army, the PLA Navy, one would think the PLA Navy would be the linchpin here. But frankly, would it? Because it's finally the army which has to come and capture and put boots on the ground as far as Taiwan is concerned. The PLA Army is already committed. It is committed in the east as far as India is concerned, in the Xinjiang province, Turkmenistan, Tibet, in the northern areas for the defense of Beijing itself. And then it has commitments on the eastern side where Taiwan is. Then you have the PLA Air Force and the Navy. What if at all the Taiwan has to be attacked, it will have to be an amphibious landing. An amphibious operation, Monty, you know, is a very, very serious, very, very complex operation. Multiple phases, some call 6 phases, some say 5 phases, but whatever it be, each of these phases have different command and control. For China to land, if you have 1 lakh people on Taiwan in the armed forces, it will have to bring in a factor of 7 to 8, which means 7 to 8 lakh soldiers will have to be landed. That means they have to move. China will have to, in some way, mobilize the entire eastern coast. It'll have to have sea superiority or sea control, as we call it, over the Taiwan Straits. It'll have to have sea denial as far away as the second island chain. Does it have that kind of manpower, that kind of ships, that kind of capability to be able to do that? You remember the last few comparable landings that have happened in the world have been during the Second World War, during the Normandy or the Incheon landings. Would you like to talk a little bit of the Incheon landing, because that's more comparable as far as the geography is concerned, because this happened in Korea while Taiwan is in similar space. Would you like to shed some light here?
Yeah, so I mean, it is always good to look at a comparative landing, but we must remember that the Incheon landings, which were done by General MacArthur, was done in 1950. And that was the time,
Right.
when the Korean War was raging in its fullest, and the North Korean forces had pushed down the United Nations forces, of which the US were the bulk, right down to what is called the Pusan perimeter. And they were almost losing when MacArthur, was asked to step in, and he planned the Incheon landings, which was a landing, it was a very risky landing, way to the north to the Incheon, which is the port city, I would say, of Seoul, and carried out a large landing over there that cut off the supply lines of the North Korean forces and forced a near collapse and allowed the United Nations forces to rush up the peninsula and in fact hit the Yalu River when China jumped into the conflict, and then again it became a bigger conflict. But now coming to the checks, when you talked about the forces at play, I think you missed out one important force that China has, and that is the rocket forces. So there are 4 forces, and there are 4, I would say, aiding agencies, which are, the space, cyber, information warfare, and logistics. So it's a 4+4 format that they have. I agree with you that, in today's environment, a landing will be complex, but I would have a slightly different opinion on the number of troops required. I think if at all
Hmm?
this has to take place, you can do it with substantially lesser troops. If there has to be a forced takeover of Taiwan, if you ask me, there will be 3 different campaigns. One is the blockade campaign. We saw, signs of it in what you mentioned is the 1925, the late last year exercises that took place in December shows us how the blockade campaign will manifest itself. Basically, the blockade campaign is not going to allow any reinforcements to come in, to support Taiwan while this war is going. The second is the strike campaign. The strike campaign will mainly be manifested, I would think, by the rocket forces. Because of the short distance involved, you don't even have to risk aircraft. Long range rockets, yeah, are enough to cover large parts of Taiwan, and have been demonstrated in the past in various exercises that China has done. And the third will be the actual landing of the amphibious kit. Now, China over the years has spared no effort in building up its amphibious forces. The Marine
Right.
Force, which used to be quite small, has grown in strength, and now they're sitting in the region. I mean, the figures vary, but at least by most pundits, I would say between 30 to 40,000 people is the Marines. But the Marines is only going to be one part of the force. You have the Army, which has got its own amphibious capabilities, and you've got the airborne capabilities of the Air Force. So if you add it all together, you're talking about 100,000 force plus. Uh, Capabilities wise, the Navy has spared no effort. You've got, right from the smaller assets of the LCOs, the LSTs, And then came, of course, the larger ones, which is the 071 LPDs, which 8 of them I think they have. And then came the 075s, with the LHDs, with large aviation capabilities and roughly around 40,000 tons. And now the 076, the Sichuan, which is just doing its sea trials, which is even larger at 55,000 tons. So you've got, quite a capable force, which they've constantly, I would say, renewed and kept ready. More importantly, they have, I don't know whether you've seen these photographs of these invasion barges, which are 3 sets of barges, which are, you can stack up and create a false jetty, through which, because the problem always comes that if you're going to carry out a hard beaching, then you have to come close inshore, and Taiwan is quite well prepared in that respect. So this allows you to go out several hundred meters outside, where you can offload your tanks, your troops, etc., through these invasion barges, which are jacked up and one connected to the other, and allow troops and heavy vehicles, A and B vehicles, to roll ashore, so to speak.
There's something
So
like the Mulberry bridges that were used during the Second World War in
absolutely, in
Normandy.
the D-Day landings, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, quite close to the D-Day landings. But the bigger, I think, issue that China has to face, if you ask me militarily, uh, I would almost go to the extent that they have the edge, and we can discuss this why, in terms of Taiwan's preparedness. But the bigger issue that I think that what really is going to be the linchpin issue is the role of the United States. And that, I think, is something that China has to be, because of the Taiwan Relations Act, and because, even though the Taiwan Relations Act, it is just said that the US will prepare themselves, will will maintain adequate forces to ensure that a forced takeover of Taiwan does not take place. But it does not say, there's an ambiguity in that, because it does not, spell out that the US will come to China's assistance. But many presidents have articulated that, including the previous President Joe Biden, who on 3 occasions said that they will come to Taiwan's assistance should there be a forced takeover. But on all 3 occasions, the State Department has walked back from that statement and maintained an element of ambiguity in it.
Right.
So that, I would say, is the political ambiguity. So it's an interesting sort of case, but I think generally the thinking is that uh, if at all a forced invasion were to take place, and if Taiwan were to capitulate and fall, it would change the entire geopolitics of West Asia, West Asia. And whatever the US has created over the years, right since the Second World War, to be the global hegemon, it will put a big question mark on that, because all other countries in the region will start carrying out analysis as to whether they can depend on the US to come to their assistance, or whether they should look at other alternatives. So I think, therefore, the US will feel almost compelled, I would say, to come to Taiwan's assistance. Do you have a different opinion on that, or would you endorse that?
I have a slightly different opinion, Monty. Think of it like this. If you see over the years, the so-called rocket force has proven itself to be, wherever they have fired rockets, they've all been duds. If you see the last few months, they have not really fired any rocket over Taiwan. There was one instance in which they fired a rocket over Taiwan. It came back and it came and hit somewhere close to Beijing. They've been falling into the Yellow Sea, for example. So is the rocket force as reliable, especially with reports of water in lieu of rocket fuel, and rocket fuel being used for other purposes? Look at the leadership. The Eastern Commander, Eastern Theater Command, which is going to lead this operation, does not have a theater commander. He's not been there for a few months now. His political commissar is missing. They have a total of about 45 to 46 four-star generals. Only 8 or 12 of them are available. Rest are all been purged away. The chief of naval staff himself is missing, as far as the PLA Navy is concerned. So they have a problem as far as leadership is concerned. And this particular operation, whatever you do, you cannot fight without the right kind of leadership. As far as China is concerned, leadership is a big point, and you cannot have a complicated operation like this without an appropriate leader. And that is a missing part. You spoke about demographies. There are people and there are reports that China's demography is shrinking, and shrinking faster than anyone else even expects. They're not at 1.4 billion as we have made it out to be. They're probably closer to 1.1 or maybe even lesser billion. That means do they have the right kind of manpower? That one child policy wreaked havoc as far as Chinese demography is concerned. And today you have people who, in China, they call it the lie flat. We don't want to do any work. We are not working. They don't want to produce children either. Because on top of every one person, there are four people on top of him. His parents, his wife's parents, and then the grandparents make it 8. So naturally, they have a problem there with demography also. Then comes the quality of their own equipment. There are numerous reports that a number of ships, even after getting commissioned, quite quickly go back into refit or enter the dockyards. A nuclear submarine sank alongside. What is your view as far as the quality of Chinese equipment, their manpower, and the fact is they have not really been tested in battle? One simple maneuver during Operation Sindoor, the Chinese army withdrew. And that was the maneuver on which the Indian army did or taking over the Kailash ranges. So I'm not too sure how capable they are. What's your view?
So, Chax, I agree that China has had around 200 generals purged, I would say, over the last 3 to 4 years in this, maybe even a little longer. Largely on corruption charges, but I think the underlying reason is that, because in China, they say in many ways corruption in the armed forces might be institutionalized to some extent, both as an effort to sort of weed it out. The main reason I think would be probably is that on lack of loyalty, that where Xi Jinping was the leader of the nation. And if he perceives a lack of loyalty, then his first reaction is to purge the person and replace him. Where I have a different view is that, I agree that, the Eastern Theater commander, as well as his Zampolit or his political officer, have been replaced. The Navy commander also lost his job, but all have been replaced. It's not that they don't have people tenanting these appointments, right? They lost their jobs, but there are new people who are tenanting these appointments. In terms of demography, even I've heard these reports that China may be underreporting, but to conceive 200, 300 million people and to say that, to show a figure of 1.4, whereas it's actually 1.1, 1.2, to my mind in today's day and age is a difficult thing to do. Might be marginal, but to my mind, 300 million people is just too large to sort of, to reconcile that difference. There have been reports, of course, on the rocket forces about this fuel, etc., and what they used in the past. But I think, I sometimes tend to feel that we have to take these reports with a pinch of salt. A lot of it is unsubstantiated. A lot of it is propaganda. I think always it is safer for any nation when you're looking at China to err on the side that their forces are generally capable. We've seen their deployments when they come for prolonged durations, and for the patrols of the Horn of Africa, anti-piracy patrols, where they sometimes took 3, 4 months. They've circumnavigated around Australia. There are video after video of the weapons that they're firing routinely, of the drones that they're bringing down, the target practice that they're doing. This thing that they've not fought a war a long time. Actually, they fought, in Vietnam, of course, in 1979. And even after that, there was a sort of Cold War which concluded, in which they lost a large number of people. And these days, with simulations, etc., you can do a lot. So to think that that the only way to learn the military art of fighting means you have to periodically go to war and fight all the time, I think might be misplaced in today's sort of environment where there are many ways in which you can simulate and improve your skills. So when it comes to Taiwan, I would say again, I don't think it's so much a lack of capability of China to overrun the island. To my mind, they might be able to do it. Their concern is the aftermath. If they do it, what is the aftermath going to be? And the aftermath, if it means that they get ostracized by a large part of the Western, if their ships are not allowed to trade, if they get sort of firewalled, because in a sense, how China is structured today, the Communist Party of China has struck this grand bargain with their own people, that
Right.
we will sort of look after your interests, you don't get politically involved. And in that
Correct.
looking after your interests, we underwrite that year on year, your quality of life, your per capita GDP is going to increase. And therefore, your purchasing power and everything is going to increase. And a large part of that is dependent on international trade. In the aftermath of a Taiwan situation, if they get isolated, if you say that no Chinese vessel can trade outside, they might be able to extend their power up from the first to the second island chain. And you asked me about the conceptualization of the island chains. The first is the immediate, which covers, Japan and then goes on to, the Philippines and the going further south of the Indonesian archipelago. The second extends slightly, another maybe 1,000, 2,000 kilometers beyond, which covers all the way up to Guam and then the further islands of the Indonesian archipelago. Uh, their power might extend up to the first to the second island chain where they can probably carry out a certain amount of trade. But I think if the US wants, because the US Navy still remains a global hegemon, they can stop them from proceeding out thereafter, and supported by the entire Western nations and a large number of other nations, if that's what happens. China does not want that to happen. So, to my mind, it is more the aftermath than the actual operation that constrains China today in taking over time. These are my views. Be delighted to hear what you have to say.
I absolutely agree with you as far as the aftermath is concerned. There is no doubt in my mind that the aftermath will be such that whatever little bit of economic growth that China is seeing now, they claim 5%. There are others who claim much lesser. With China, one never knows what is the correct number. But whatever it is a large economy. There is no doubts on that. And if they have to live up to the compact which they have with the people of China, you give us your political freedom, we'll give you economic stability, economic freedom. That's what the compact. And that seems to be holding as of now, at least. But the other question is, does China have the stomach for a fight? Because this is an operation which will have to be something quick, fast, decisive. The same thing that US did as far as Venezuela is concerned. Not the right, it's an apple to orange comparison. Venezuela had nothing really to defend itself, but it was a swift operation. On the other side, you had Russia, which went into Ukraine, and people thought 1 week and Ukraine will fold up. We're in the 4th year. So China doesn't have the stomach to stick on for a fight for 4 years, especially if they enter into Taiwan, and then you have to have an urban fighting and guerrilla fighting as far as the mountains and jungles are concerned. It is not going to be so quick an affair. But my concern more is with respect to South China Sea, the NSS, which the US has come up with, the National Security Doctrine, Australia, that they have the new with a Trump twist. How is this going to be impacted if China does take over Taiwan? Because there are reports and there are these theories that are floating around that if China takes over Taiwan, they will start charging a toll on ships that go through the South China Sea. And South China Sea is among the world's busiest slots, if you will. The next block that is going to open up is the Arctic. And China is already positioning itself as a near Arctic power. On the other hand, you have US, which is very, very carefully orchestrating in some forms a control over all the slots. Panama Canal, it has now control. The new Arctic routes, when they come up, it's trying to do it with Greenland. The Straits of Bab el Mandab, with the Yemen getting into a fight between UAE and the Saudi Arabia, something which possibly most of us would not have imagined it would happen. And the Somaliland being recognized by Israel, more or less saying that, okay, this part we are going to cover. Iran going under, or it will definitely be weakened after this. So he's covering the other straits also into the Persian Gulf. Malacca Straits, you can say it is by proxy with Singapore and India being an ally. So he's covering most of them. Out here, if he has to cover the Taiwan Straits, he needs Taiwan. And do you think America will let it slide? And what happens to Japan?
So these are all, Chad's big questions. I mean, the NSS, I think the fear in the NSS is that it is the first signs of the US retreat to the Western Hemisphere, where they prioritize the Western Hemisphere from a security construct. And therefore, you see, I mean, this whole Monroe Doctrine, which is a Monroe Doctrine plus, where essentially says that, first let's sort out our own hemisphere, and therefore Venezuela, Panama, Greenland, all that is sort of figuring into. And if they do that, I think the concern from the other nations is that where does it leave us who are outside the Western Hemisphere? And these countries are the countries that you mentioned, the US allies in the region, which you can talk about Japan. Taiwan is a quasi-ally in a sense. There's Philippines, there's Australia, there's South Korea. All these allies are concerned on the articulation, though I would say the NSS still says it mentions their commitment towards defending Taiwan, but I don't think it's spelled out in as many words. And it sort of it does not say that they're going to walk away from the Western Pacific, but the language is much stronger insofar as the Western Hemisphere is concerned. So these are changing times, and one doesn't know whether, this is going to be a permanent effect or if there's a change in administration in the US, things will change again. Now you spoke about, the timing also to some extent that, is it the right time? Do they have the stomach for it, etc. I mean, many dates have been set in the past. There was the Davidson window, which said by 2027 the invasion will take place. There are other
Right.
reports which say 2035. There are other reports which say 2047, which is this, 2049 or 49, which is the centenary of the PRC, the People's Republic of China. That's the time, when the invasion will go through. But these are all figures that, people are throwing out. I don't think they have any, substance on which they are based. There might be some underlying reasons, but I don't think, you can hold people to these numbers that are being thrown out, these years that are being thrown out. To my mind, as long as mainland China's power uh, is accreting, is going up, with relation to Taiwan and its supporters in the region, as long as the disparity is growing, China can afford to wait because they know that with every day they wait, the situation is slightly better than the day earlier. And therefore, the chances for a successful outcome is going to be keep increasing. The problem can start under two conditions. One is that, if the administration in Taiwan chooses to do something drastic like declare independence or something like that, then of course there will be a immediate, I would say, reaction from China in that respect. So it depends on how, and I don't think that's likely to happen because even the current, DPP administration, which is there with William Lai, even though he is, pro-independence, you can say, but everyone is more invested in the status quo than, trying to look at independence. Even the
Absolutely
KMT, they look at much closer relations with China, but even there it's all calibrated. So largely, I would say it is perpetuation of the status quo, which is the default position that all the political parties in China are taking right. It can prolong this. The problem will come, therefore, either, there's an administration which comes into China, into Taiwan, which I mentioned earlier, that, changes this and says that we want to go independent. Or if China carries out an assessment that with each passing day now, your chances of a successful outcome start diminishing instead of increasing. And the
correct.
curve sort of is starting to go downwards. Then I think China will be under pressure that, this is a window that we have right now in which we can hope to have a successful outcome. With every passing day, it's going to be worse. Then why don't we just go ahead and execute it? So these are the two conditions I would say which can sort of change and drive something, but nothing in the near horizon. Let me ask you one more thing right now, because I think we're nearly coming to the end of our time. Where does
Right.
India fit into all this, in your view? How does India fit into this entire equation? Do we have a role? I mean, our dependency on China primarily, I would say, is in the realm of semiconductors. Semiconductors, the entire world is dependent on China. Apart from that, do we have any interest in the region?
See, we do have some interest. Semiconductors is one big thing. There is no doubt on that. And it is going to likely to be there for a while India has started its own semiconductor mission, etc. It will take time. Our other thing is the APIs and everything else that we get from China. But a bigger role begins when the Chennai Vladivostok trade route becomes more open and the Arctic route opens up. That's the other big thing. And don't forget, Japan is among our bigger trading partners. And I foresee our trade with Japan only increasing, not decreasing. Then you have the aspect of why should America be interested in India? The one place where US can actually twist the dragon's tail is if India starts raising a banner of just the threat of attack in the Tibet side. So China cannot really pull out its forces from this end. The Malacca Straits is the other part. Because let's face it, China has been facing the Malacca dilemma for ages. It has tried multiple things, BRI being one of them, the CPEC. Then you have the Myanmar corridor, which is already working, but it didn't work out. So it's not doing so well. They tried the Kra Canal and across the Kra Isthmus. They've tried their best to get rid of the Malacca dilemma. And India controls the Malacca Straits with the Greater Nicobar Islands, the GNI project. As it comes up, will give it even better control. We have three big unsinkable aircraft carriers: Diglipur on the north, Port Blair, Karnak, and down south in the GNI
Yeah.
Island. So we have that capability, and this is something which the US cannot do without if it has to twist Chinese tails. And you're right that US is trying its best to keep itself within its own hemisphere, but I look at it more like putting China in its place. US has got three basic requirements. One, control of oil. And that's what it has achieved with Venezuela and Iran. Second is with respect to its own hemisphere and trade. It is controlling the Western hemisphere. Like I explained, mostly slocks, they have all come to choke points, and it has somebody there at that choke point to be able to manage it. The third is the dollar. China is among the bigger players who are trying their best to replace the dollar with the yuan. India is a small time player in this. So therefore, it has no option but to hit at China. And it will use India as one of those levers that it will go on. What are your thoughts, Monty?
Yeah, so Chax, I had a slightly different opinion that we are two large nations in Asia. I mean, there is a power disparity between China and India because China started their economic development far before us. And if you take in GDP terms, if we are roughly around 4 trillion, China is roughly around 18 trillion. So there's a quite a large
Yeah,
disparity. But our
at
growth
least
rate
a
is
four
high.
times.
And yeah, and our growth rate is high. And we have potential to partly at least, I would say, uh, address this disparity in maybe several decades moving ahead. So that is the long-term situation. But I think I don't subscribe to the position that the default position between India and China is one of conflict. I think it is incumbent upon us to manage this relationship and to see how
Right.
best we can work with differences so that while there will be competition, there may be occasional confrontation also because you have unsettled borders, but peace should prevail, and there should be adequate maturity on both sides to ensure that peace prevails so that both of us can continue on our paths of development. I would say that is the bottom line for us. So, in that sense, I think it puts a little caution on us as to how we tackle Taiwan, because any closeness by us towards Taiwan is not seen in good light by China. We need not get deterred by that, but I think it has to be calibrated in what
Right.
in that sense. And economic engagement has to be strong because Taiwan is a dynamic economy. I mean, you might say it's got a population of only 23, 24 million, but its GDP is nearly a trillion. I mean, it is around 8.5 billion, 850 billion. And
Yeah.
plus, semiconductors is colossal. I mean, they are the 60 to 70% of all semiconductors in the world are made in Taiwan. I mean, you can just see of high-end semiconductors at least. Yeah. maybe even more,
Correct.
maybe in the 80s, somewhere around. So therefore, it's a we'll have to sort of manage this relationship between and the way we engage both these. But at the same time, yes, certainly our interest is also in the status quo. If at all there has to be a resolution, that should be a peaceful resolution. It should not be a forced takeover in any way, because it will mess up a number of things, and it will right from freedom of navigation to and it sets a new precedent in a way. If you have a forced takeover, there it sets a new precedent to change boundary lines using the application of force, which is not desirable in the world that we live today. So these are my sort of closing thoughts. Yeah, you have any closing thoughts, Jax, on this?
Absolutely correct, Monty. I totally agree with you that, like the chronometer, which is right behind you, uh,
Mhm.
time is the best adjudicator. Time is will tell. Indeed, these are changing times. Indeed, these are challenging times, and India has no option but to rise to these challenges. So, my dear friends, thank you very much for being with us. Please like, share, subscribe to both Double M Dialogues and Chax Simplifies. And as always, do comment and let us know what are your thoughts. What do you think India must do? What do you think? Will China even attack or try to attack Taiwan? If so, what is your opinion as far as the future is concerned? Till then, we await your comments, your wishes. Monty, thank you very much. It was a great pleasure talking to you. Sorry, we had a little bit of overrun over the time that we promised ourselves, but I think it was time very well spent.
Thanks, Jax. Delighted to be here. And also for the all the viewers of WM Dialogues, you must have a look at Chax Simplifies. He breaks up things into, easy small parts and makes it much easier to comprehend. So delighted to be here, Chax, and look forward to many such engagements in future.
Thank you, Monty. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.
Good luck and God bless to all of you. Bye-bye.